Number 25, Ryan Goldenchild by Freya Eden-Ellis. It was a feat of astounding talent beyond any he had shown on screen. To become a caricature of yourself requires a kind of dedication to character hitherto unknown to him. He was propelled by fear of the worst fate that might befall a man like him: irrelevance. Virtuous only in the most fashionable of issues, the ones that made him the headline. His furrowed brows, over-earnest acting was so faithfully replicated in post after post. His face no longer knew any other way to arrange itself. The look was serious, but also sultry, so of course his range was unaffected. Similarly static was the angle at which he took the countless selfies of this blandly beautiful face. All that changed was the wall behind him, or occasionally there was a choice between angsting beside an arrangement of beautiful pot plants versus pouting beside a pampered pooch. Sometimes, indeed most times, he took both for good measure. That would keep his audience happy. In times of national tragedy, when real life or death concerns threaten to overshadow his iconism, an outpouring of realness in his designer loungewear, revealing his tear-streaked face, was a necessary departure from perfection. In a live stream he would sing. Oh, he would inspire hope and raise spirits. And how much better he would feel as the virtual hearts temporarily fulfilled his yearning for real love. Ryan Goldenchild was an actor, but he was #InstaFamous first. Number 26, Chris Whitty from Harder Times by Steve Mason. Well, here's a mighty muddle-up, and I'll be gormed. A simple, tranquil man, distinctively purity by dint of his anonymity, is dragged, not kicking and screaming, but rolling his normally fixed, cat-like eyes from the comfortable dark confines of his medical repository into the blinding light of the piercing public gaze. Oh, Chris Whitty. Witty by name, but hardly witty by nature, or so it appears. But then, dear reader, the circumstances in which Professor Whitty, for he is so esteemed, has emerged from his hibernation as England's chief medical officer are hardly those to encourage anybody of a right and lucid mind to waste precious words on such frivolity. Plucked from the warming blanket of obscurity and deposited roughly under a dazzling cold spotlight, this tall, angular figure, his bald head shaped like a recently unearthed turnip, glinting in the glare, has taken to fame in the manner of a fish deposited on a riverbank. Floundering, he has stood transfixed at press conferences until, wittering, wincing and wilting, he has been forced to address the nation in rigid tones, redolent of any entity newly introduced to speech. For be aware, this is a private man, a single and singular man, never before starring in even one press conference, let alone an epidemic of them. And then, poor Whitty, he was carted off and acted a TV advertisement, his awkward presence lurching into view like another of Victor Frankenstein's creations gone wrong, politely asking of us, with all the animation of a creaking creature newly fashioned in the laboratory, to do as he says. And so it was with great relief that Professor Whitty, ignoring all his own mild pleadings, himself succumbed to the virus and slunk back, albeit pro tem, into the welcoming shadows. 27. Belinda Hutchinson by Andrea Southwell. Belinda Hutchinson, the name alone leaves a bad taste in one's mouth. A lady who seems to believe the world evolves around only herself, wearing the latest fashions from the stores on High Street, the stores that sell the garnished fabrics that only the rich can afford. You know the kind of clothes that are so over the top they make your eyes hurt. with talons that go click, click as she types on her phone. Get close enough and you will find yourself choking on hairspray. Stand next to her and you won't be able to escape. You'll end up hearing all about her opinions and her world views. Keep in mind she never has left her hometown. With green eyeliner around her eyes and bright pink lipstick, with hair that looks suspiciously overprocessed, and with a voice that drips honey, but her eyes always shine with venom. Once meeting her, you won't forget, and who could blame you? Number 28. WTF Peters Esq by Agnes Foy. Mr. Peters possesses a face that is hallmarked by fatuous insipidity. No laughter lines, beady eyes, thin lips, small head. His short brow, eye bags, jowls and neck are, each and all, creased by emptiness. His dress code conveys a life tediously dedicated to externals. He's designed himself sociable, desirable. This construct is on avatar terms, but he feels debonair. He terms himself dapper. He considers himself handsome. And he loves women. His voice has woodpecker impact. His opinions grate and vex, gender indiscriminately. His manners and mannerisms mirror his audience, but his yap, tap, yap brand of inexhaustible ranting still irks all comers. He taps noisily about totty. He believes the use of this term infuses him with a man-of-the-world verb. At night he dreams the dreams of his avatar. Fashionably erotic, sophisticated women abound, all intricately framed in gold leaf hues. Throughout his busy bee days of chronic male neediness, he yearns. He wants a muse he can stake claim to as his triumphant own. He craves a woman who will poise rose-like to enhance him. She'll passenger his masculinity, contending Aston Martin with classy enthusiasm. His dream women are covetable women, of product grade that Klimt would lasciviously covet too. He craves an Adele to parade as his very own piece of envy-generating totty. He assiduously courts titled totty, but he bitterly resents the attendant financial costs. Unbeknownst to Mr. Peters, 3 terrific, towering, turbocharged totties dream their own aspirational dreams. He features. These totties can tot up lives on balance sheet terms. They can spot a true tot, a self-obsessed tot. They can recognize a tot who has nothing within him of any life-enhancing value to another human being. Their dreams are infused with jurisprudence. WTF Peters Esq is positioned center stage. Number 29. Mrs. Bullen's Ear by Chris Ewer. Mrs. Brullen was a large, cheery, slightly deaf lady of German descent. She was now 93 and a widow, and she reminded you that, "Already I'm a widow of 26 years," expecting you to receive this information with surprise and despair in equal quantities. The fact that this declaration was made so often repeated forced the visitor into acting mode of Oscar-winning proportions. In the times that now surrounded her, with the television warning her to stay indoors, the fact that Mrs. Brullen's association with going out of doors had ceased some 10 years ago did not stop her from reminding everyone that she was complying with the nice man on the television by remaining housebound. In her small way, Mrs. Brullen tried hard to grasp the 21st century as best she could. Her singular courage in learning the intricacies of a mobile phone floundered on many an occasion. Her son flummoxed her completely by suggesting a video call. Videos were something once removed from a black and white film to which Mrs. Brullen and try as she might, she could find no opening in the phone for a video. The day of her son's usual phone call arrived, and his anticipation was dampened when all he could see was his mother's ear. She shouted down the phone in her usual manner. "Can you hear me, Kevin? It's so lovely to hear you, my leapling." Despite entreaties to his mother to look at the phone instead of putting it to her ear, Mrs. Brullen repeated her greeting even louder. "Kevin, it's me. I can hear you." Needless to say, the idea of video calling was shelved, and normal telephone procedures resumed. Mrs. Brullen's pride in mastering a mobile phone, however, remains a source of pride to her to this day. Number 30. Mr. Common Sense by David Holt. Billy Barrelby worked for an electrical wholesalers in East Anglia until they realised that he probably created more problems than he solved and offered him early retirement. This was a mixed blessing, as he now had more time on his hands, but slightly less spare cash. In some ways that did not matter. He was never one to over-worry about his clothing, being overweight, slightly unkempt, and generally presenting himself in worn jogging pants which had barely experienced mild physical exertion, let alone competitive sport. In many ways his needs were few. However, he did like to get about and, spreading his length in either bar or cafe, talk loudly of his firmly held opinions, daring anyone to contradict him, and punctuating his oratory with jabs of the index finger. However, Billy had studiously avoided taking on any civic or social responsibility, at least partly to avoid exposing himself to criticism by others like him. The message board of his regional newspaper's website provided a boom. Here he held the world to account as Mr. Common Sense, at no personal expense and with a captive audience. Nothing escaped his gimlet eye. He was the scourge of any young journalist who had rushed their copy. The lamentable train service was run by idiots, although he rarely used it. The need for a new bypass was beyond doubt. It should have been opened yesterday. Every local politician was corrupt, and the town hall was full of work-shy pen pushers. The crowning glory was that the undoubted insights and scorn of Mr. Common Sense could be delivered to the waiting world at any time, day or night, and frequently were, while still clad in those jogging pants and a threadbare dressing gown, which, like Billy, had seen better days. 31. Lorna Tramples by Lisa Chudley. Lorna Tramples, the loveliest creature, to all as it would seem but her closest relations. This charade being so well rehearsed, it remains to all else quite undetectable. Lorna was one of 5 sisters raised by a young widow, her father having expired under unfortunate circumstances before his daughters came of age. Being neither the eldest nor the youngest, the urge to stand out was great. Coupled with the limited means which sustained her in youth, the mystery of Lorna's current public persona is quite revealed. In recent times, social media has become Mrs. Trample's platform, somewhere to showcase her many achievements. Equipped with a doting husband, perfect figure, darling child, amazing career, she is undeniably the life and soul of every social occasion. If maintaining this facade requires distancing from those, including her own siblings, who could possibly expose her reality, then so be it. At the end of each day, Lorna retires to the widow's house, closes the door, pours a large gin, and utters a soliloquy. Her true disdain for all whom she had had the misfortune to encounter that day. The widow's dwelling, where Mrs. Tramples lives gratis, is squalid and damp, the inhabitants therein being either too entitled or infirm to care for it. The widow herself, contrary to popular belief, is but a stooge for the parasitic tramples, paying their way and protecting their public image from any with the audacity to pry. Lorna's personal regimen has become so punishing of late that she has taken to living her comestible indulgences vicariously through her offspring, who, as a result, is becoming quite plump, the child itself a mere accessory, there to be picked up, shown off, or put down whenever the mood arises. 32. The Fly Tipper by John Carter. He stood part way between his battered van and the open doors of the garage, a big man, but big in a bad way, big-bellied, thick-legged, multi-chinned, tracksuit trousers, grey and stained, ending in sockless ankles and scuffed running shoes, a straining sweatshirt too short to hide his large, bare belly, carried a Premier's team's logo. But no running track or football pitch had borne his ponderous frame for many a long year. Like an inquisitive walrus, he cast sharp eyes over the contents of the garage, a miscellany of household and garden items requiring removing. The council's price was far above my budget, and an indifferent town hall minion reacted to my protests with advice that I use a contractor. Thus the large man came to be standing in my drive. His parked van, 50 shades of white, but mostly mud, said Mike's Disposal Service on the side, but he was not a Mike. Though his English was good, in a matey, South London sort of way, it came with an Eastern European accent. A Milos, maybe. Two young lads, from their appearances sons, remained closer to the van, exuding an air of unease. Milos Walrus contemplated the contents of the garage for a few minutes more. Then he quoted a price less than a quarter of the council's fee. I asked for time to think about it, which did not seem to bother him. "You ring me if you decide yes," he said, or rather spluttered, running a hand over his stubbled chin, then turning and waddling back to the van. The boys were already inside, eager to go. I wondered if all three were accustomed to making fast exits. The price was good. Too good to be true. I never rang. Number 33. The Worst of Times. Sylvia Pereira. It has been the worst of times. 2020, a highly contagious virus, coronavirus, caused a widespread global pandemic, sending the world slowly into lockdown. Sami Baswala, a shopkeeper, businessman, landlord to numerous properties, is a rich man. Tall and limply with bowed legs, he wore his toupee past his forehead and slightly over his thick black-framed glasses that covered his small eyes. He had a whiny voice and purposely set himself out to be out of pocket and struggling, always complaining about bills he had to pay, how much this and how much that had cost him. "I can't afford to close down," he tells Mrs. Topper, his regular customer, when he asked about the lockdown. "Well, I've read that the only essential businesses will remain open," said Mr. Topper, a straight-talking, short, petite woman. "Dry cleaners are not essential, are they?" And that was that. Across London, Mrs. Topper's son works as an apprentice in a bespoke tailor's workroom. Joel Laurel, a celebrity menswear designer, dark-haired, monocle-wearing, waistcoated man, is intentionally pinning a morning suit. His client, a professional footballer, talks into his earpiece while admiring himself in the mirror, a specimen of fitness and coveted celebrity. Mr. Laurel gestures with his hand for his measuring tape, chalk, and finally pins, much to the sufferance of his young apprentice, Jack Topper, who is starstruck. He had a habit of disapproving with tuts, much to the annoyance of Mr. Rex, his trusted head tailor, and a forgiving man, who asked, "Do you need me, sir?" Tut. Mr. Rex, a jolly man, neatly dressed, had an honest face about him, stood in the shop lined with reams of expensive dark cloth, bow ties, cravats and button drawers, quickly contemplating lockdown and the unknown future. 34. Mr. Bumble by Eric Midwinter. Few could match the solemn pomposity nor emulate the scornful disdain with which Mr. Bumble conducts his public duties, for their colossal ambit is not for the distribution of local or regional, nor even of national, but of universal credit. He nurtures the monies entrusted to him as if they were his own, as a miser might gloat over a glistening gold piece in his solitary cell. Mr. Bumble, too, sits officiously alone, upright in his officious chair before his officious desk, whereupon stands his mechanism of despair, the state's computer. Thousands attempt to trek through the jungle of misleading trails and obstructed byways as they seek through to the ether to obtain universal credit. Here is John Anyone. After hours of frustrated exploration, he has completed his application for more. Mr. Bumble scans the screen suspiciously. Unemployed? Indolent fellow. Poor health? Malingering fellow. Family to feed? Profligate fellow. Mr. Bumble does not entertain doubt. With portentous ceremony he places his hand on the unseeing mouse, and his cruel forefinger presses down, sweeping aside John Anyone's hapless plea. Over and over again that brutal forefinger presses 1,000 times, and then 1,000 times once more, refusing public assistance to a myriad cases of private distress. Oh, Mr. Bumble, cannot you look beyond your unforgiving mechanism of despair that blocks, with its wired formulations, the sombre truth of poverty, and act with humane neighbourliness in good heart? Number 35. Dombey and Burns by Steve Kimber. Release the hounds was never an utterance from Mr. Dombey on the steps of his stately pile, but certainly one frequently addressed to unwelcome visitors from the steps of his solitary mansion by his modern-day nemesis, Montgomery Burns of The Simpsons. Both distinguished, solemn, and full of their own importance, these self-made men, one in shipping, one in nuclear power, have no love of the poor. As Dickens declares, Mr. Dombey habitually looked over the vulgar herd, not at them, and to an office junior, Dombey looked at him, an expression of disdain on his face, a contemptuous and disparaging assumption. Similarly, in The Simpsons, this man has no idea how to behave like a billionaire, says Monty Burns. Where's the dignity? Where's the contempt for the common man? Both hold unrivaled views of their own importance. The earth was made for Dombey and Son to trade in, and the sun and moon were made to give them light, says Dickens. And Burns trades on a more modern theme. I can walk into McDonald's and order soup, and they'll make it. Both worship money. Money, Paul can do anything, Dombey says to his son. When Mr. Burns is told by Homer Simpson that he's the richest guy he knows, Burns replies, oh yes, but I'd trade it all for a little more. Dombey and Burns both have fawning, sycophantic assistants, James Carker and Wayland Smithers. Of Carker, Dickens writes that he is utterly borne down by the greatness and superiority of Mr. Dombey. Wayland Smithers holds similar views of Mr. Burns. Sir, I've arranged for all the people of Australia to join hands tonight and spell out your name with candles. A headstone epitaph for both? Monty Burns has it. $1 for eternal happiness? I'd be happier with the dollar. Number 36. Kent by Mary Egan. The full amount of Kent's wealth was going to be revealed soon, and how he had avoided paying tax for years. He studies his reflection in the window of McDonald's. Large, crooked nose, eyes bulging with a forehead which would put Frankenstein to shame. His greasy hair hung over his collarless shirt. He followed the line of his clothes downwards, ragged and torn. He had spent a fortune to look like this. Soon he would visit Bermuda, the tax haven, and get back to what he once looked like, smooth, suave, but knowing he could never be named as the playboy of the world again. Lying low and incognito in Bermuda, life would be comfortable, and he had great expectations for the future. For the past few months, he'd set himself up as homeless and living on a handful of change which was given to him. Outside McDonald's was his favourite begging place, but now with COVID-19 virus weaving its way around the world like a stream of infected water, donations were down to a trickle. Life on the street had changed. A couple of more weeks and he reassured himself that he would go back to the person he once was. He reckoned if his surgeon could change his appearance this much, then he should reverse him into an attractive man, but with different features than before. He sat down, smiling to himself. The media may destroy him, but for all anyone knew, he had disappeared. His millions were never going to be discovered. He had made arrangements with a commercial airline so that he and his surgeon would fly out together. 3 more weeks. One luxury he kept was his mobile. He checked it now beneath his blanket. All flights cancelled. He smiled. I will get to Bermuda.